Welcome to another episode of Ghoul Talk Legends, Pen Pal Edition.
In this episode, I'll tell you a story about why you should never be too quick on dismissing somebody's claim of living in a haunted house.
My name's David and welcome once more to Ghoul Talk Legends. Though my beliefs in the paranormal are fairly jaded, I'm still intrigued by the stories, accounts and folklore surrounding apparent sightings and unexplained phenomena. For the most part, as interesting as they may be, a lot of these experiences can be explained away, or a large shadow of doubt can be cast across alleged ghostly activity when examined more closely. That said, occasionally I hear something that brings into question my own beliefs, something seemingly less easy to write off. Here's Andrea to explain in more detail.
As Victoria is full of the weird and the wonderful, and being one of the most haunted cities in North America and arguably in Canada, you're bound to live in a haunted house at some point while living on the island. Going back to the early 2000s, in an area known for being notoriously haunted is a township called View Royal. Now, View Royal is known for many significant events since the mid-1800s. A lot of historical lands lay within this area, including ancient burial grounds, sacred sites, and known for many tragic events that have occurred over the years. In an area not far off on the main road leading into downtown View Royal was a townhouse complex, seeming quite normal. As a young lady in her early 20s moved back to the island, a place where she'd grown up, she moved into this townhome, unbeknownst to things that would soon be very apparent. She moved in, just her and her cat, and the first thing that she immediately noticed was that the place was very cold. And being somebody who was commonly known for having parties and gatherings and family events and always a very warm and welcoming home, it was a mystery to her why this place always felt cold and uninviting, and was something that her guests would also comment on. It was very unlike any place that she had ever lived. About a month in, while living in the place, she started noticing things, which started off with just random noises in the home, the sounds of faint footsteps that could be mistaken for creaks and cracks of the old townhouse, and possibly even the cat running around in the place. Though, most of the time she was able to account for the cat, who seemed to stick by her quite closely. Soon after, she started getting noise complaints from the neighbor. The property manager stopped by one day to ask what all the commotion was about and had politely asked her to turn her stereo down or move it away from the wall. Well, the young lady invited the property manager in, letting him know that she actually didn't have anything set up. The only thing she had installed and was using was a tiny little 12-inch TV upstairs in the main bedroom, which was nowhere near any wall and could not possibly create the sounds that were being reported. She even proved this to the property manager, so he was quite stumped as well. The other thing that was in question was that when these noises were being heard by the neighbors, the young lady wasn't home. She was often at work, juggling 3 jobs at the time. As the noise continued, the property manager was called again. Well, shortly after the complaints rolled in, the young woman started noticing more frequent activity happening in the home. The first thing that was noticed was when you walked in the main foyer, right underneath the stairs was a room. It was just an empty room with no pipes, no hot water tank. There was absolutely nothing. It was just a room. And the only access point to this room was through the living room. This is when she started noticing that it almost seemed like somebody was from the inside of this room pounding on the door, eventually being able to see somebody twisting the door handle. This young lady and her boyfriend both experienced this multiple times, to the point where it was becoming a nightly routine. Fearful for what they might find, the young lady finally had the courage and ran over, and with a few deep breaths, she opened the door. Nothing was there. Shortly after this, the property manager was contacted again by the upset neighbor with all the noise and commotion. This time, the young lady at least had some explanation. And fortunately, as she was explaining this to the property manager, the events started happening before him. Scared and confused by what he just saw, he wanted to immediately leave the premises, though he asked the young lady to follow him. Standing outside, clearly shaken, he had no answers for what he just saw, but he did not think it was safe for the young lady to be staying there by herself. but she assured him she had nowhere else to go and she would stay. Days followed. Whatever was in this home clearly understood that it was being noticed, and that's when the activity ramped up. As mentioned, the young lady had nothing set up except for the tiny little TV upstairs where her and her cat would commonly watch movies, often having 5 VHS tapes hanging off her bedroom door. One evening, as the young lady was sitting on the edge of her bed watching one of these movies with her cat right next to her, the house got very quiet. All of a sudden, the door flung open and started violently swinging back and forth to the point where the videos were like falling to the ground out of the bag. The young girl was so shocked, she just kept watching the door open and close, not sure if it was an earthquake, but realizing nothing else in the home was moving. And then noticing that the cat had taken interest in something with his head moving back and forth. And then as quickly as it started, it stopped. Not sure what to think, but holding some fear. She stayed up all night seeing if this would happen again, but it didn't until the next night. This occurrence would happen a few times a week, leading into almost every night. In addition to this, she started noticing under the doorway, you could hear and see the footsteps, and not just by one person, but it sounded like a train station, just back and forth, people moving constantly. Again, the cat also noticing the movement. So scared, the young lady would only fall asleep about every 4th night just because she was so tired she couldn't even stay awake, sleeping in the walk-in closet where it was the only place in the house where she felt somewhat safe. One area of this house that this young woman was always very cautious of was a spare bedroom, which when you came upstairs was to the left. And next to this spare room was a tiny little crawl space for storage, but it was just a very odd little space under the window, and to the right of the room was another walk-in storage area. But for some reason, it just felt like there was almost a vortex. And she always felt like when she walked in between these 2 storage areas that she was breaking some energy barrier. And she wasn't the only one to notice that. Friends of hers would often stay with her over weekends, being in their 20s and going out on the night on the town. And she always offered a very safe haven for her friends after going out for a few drinks. And one of her friends, who did not believe in the paranormal, commonly said when she stayed in that room that she felt like somebody was watching her and moving around in that room at night. One day, when the young lady was downstairs washing dishes, she knew her cat was taking interest in something and just sitting on the top pillar, but watching the spare room. But she just thought the cat was being the cat and carried on washing her dishes. Shortly after, she heard this commotion and she went running up the stairs as the cat started acting frantic. Now, one point to mention was that the young woman always kept the door in the spare room closed just because she never liked that room, and it was considered her office. She always kept the door in this room closed, always feeling very uncomfortable and also feeling watched, and just that she wasn't alone, feeling a very heavy, oppressive presence in this room. But as she took upstairs to see what the commotion was, she walked over towards the spare room where the noise was seemingly coming from. Opening the door, the cat cowering behind her, and as soon as she turned the knob and opened the door, she walked into a flurry of papers, all her office work, fluttering around like snow, circling in the room in 2 very distinct patterns until the papers just stopped in thin air and rested there for about 5 to 10 seconds and then fell to the floor, heavy like weight. She then noticed that her huge brass lamp, a very heavy lamp from like the 70s or 80s, was ripped out of the wall and thrown across the room, dented. Not an item that would have dented very easily. Still confused about what was going on, but feeling uncomfortable in this room, she checked the window. It was open, but only by an inch, but it was secure, so she knew that nobody had been in the room. And thinking, there's no way she could rationalize how the paper was spinning, and there was no way she could rationalize how the lamp was ripped out of the wall and thrown across the room like that when there was nobody in the home except for her and the cat, and the door was closed. Starting to feel scared, she decided to close the door, and she did not want to clean the mess up, and left it for a good week before she was able to gain the courage to go back in there. And when she did, she could hear faint noises in the background and felt like somebody was watching her. At this point, things in the home really seemed to escalate. The noise was getting so bad that the neighbors continued to complain. Activity in the home was such a normal occurrence, happening every day, and people wouldn't even come over anymore, including the gentleman that she was seeing. Too afraid to come over, he eventually broke up with her because he couldn't handle what was going on anymore, fearing it was something quite negative. Feeling very alone as other people had witnessed these events, She'd been told to not tell anybody and to keep these stories to herself because they were not willing to go forward with the stories they witnessed in fear of what others would think. And they also felt for the young lady that it would be best for her reputation to keep the occurrences to herself. Feeling very alone and fearing that she needed answers quickly, she decided to start investigating the paranormal and local history around this area. Contacting the local cemeteries society, who was quite aware of both the paranormal and historical events, especially surrounding that area, she was able to uncover that where the townhouse complex was actually built was not taken in good faith and was built on top of an ancient indigenous burial grounds. Things started making sense, but in doing so, this also made the activity in the home increase significantly. Still fearful, but now having some knowledge, she felt a little bit more confident in what she was dealing with. One morning, on a day off, she was ready to go out and enjoy the sunshine and shake off some of the negativity of living in the home. As she was in the bathroom blow-drying her hair, the door in the bathroom quite violently slammed up against her, pushing her into the wall. Thinking perhaps that she caught the door with the wire of the hairdryer, she looked on the door handle, but then realized that the cord was actually in front of her and it wouldn't have been possible to catch the door. Thinking not much more of it, she pushed the door open again and continued on getting ready. This time, with greater force, the door slammed against her, squeezing her against the wall to the point where she was struggling to breathe and she could not get the door off of her. She was able to break free. As she opened the door, she was staring directly at her staircase, watching a very heavy-set, middle-aged man storm towards her, but noticing she could see through him. As he got within feet of her, she lost her shit, screaming at him. She started yelling for her neighbors to call the police and that she needed help, and telling this man, "Get out of her house, go, you don't belong here." And within feet of reaching her, he vanished into thin air. Breaking down in tears, she couldn't take it anymore, and as honest as she could be, she told the spirit or whatever was there that she meant no harm, but she is not putting up with this anymore, and she's taking back her home, and asked them to leave her alone. After this day, the activity ceased. Still feeling the heavy energy in the home, though, that energy had shifted. The only thing she commented for the next few months of living in there was feeling almost like there was a very tall, masculine presence that would follow her around when she was downstairs. Shortly after this event, even though things had calmed down, she felt she had overstayed her welcome and it was time for her to leave. She wished the spirits in the home well, and asked them to please not do that to anybody else that lived in the home. Somebody that this young lady knew asked to move into this home, knowing the occurrences that had happened. And the young family that stayed there noted they never experienced any occurrences from the day they lived there until the day they moved out. At the time, there was only one small group that investigated the paranormal in town and took quite an interest in this property. At the time, the young lady was still living there and during this activity, and denied them access to investigating in fear that the activity would become increasingly unbearable. Though keeping in contact and through the research that the young woman had done, it was believed that the activity was stirred up, linked to how the land was taken. Years later, the young woman had admitted that her perception on what happened at the time had greatly changed over the years, from feeling like she was being terrorized while living in the home, to then having a greater understanding of what probably happened, feeling sorrow for the spirits that were still there, likely feeling like they were defending their property that was unrightfully taken from them. While living in this home, I will say that I truly felt terrified. I had never experienced anything like this before in my life, even though I was not unfamiliar to the paranormal. Due to these events that I experienced while living in this home was the foundation for me becoming a paranormal investigator. So, being both a skeptic and the believer, this experience has taught me to never dismiss one story, even if it is hard to believe, because there are truths in things that we don't understand.
There are probably very few people in the world who haven't heard a generations-old tale involving unexplained phenomena, usually centered around that one notorious house that all the local kids dare each other to go near. Talk of disembodied voices and unfathomable noises in the dead of night. Oppressive and claustrophobic feelings that attach to the mind like gossamer. spectral visions that manifest from thin air and disappear just as quickly. Usually these stories are spread like some kind of supernatural Chinese whispers. However, to hear such vividly detailed and explainable accounts directly from someone who experienced it firsthand, and whose opinion and integrity I respect greatly, makes my usual response of, okay, whatever, and rewords it to, what if? After all, they can't all just be stories, can they?